I know what you are thinking. The biggest ships for the Sith as we know them look like this, whereas the most commonly depicted ships for the Covenant look like this, and they are supplemented by even bigger ships like these, all of which are dwarfed, ultimately, by this. And it's not even the biggest ship of its class, so naturally, this little guy must be out of his depth, right? We will talk about the relative power capabilities of the ships later down the line, but for this video, we are talking about numbers, and the disparity between the two may surprise you. This is A Galaxy on Fire Part 3. In order to move vast numbers of men and women from the far reaches of space to the battlefields of distant worlds, you're going to need vessels to ship and resupply them, and warships to defend them. We are finally back, after a small break, addressing two videos I've been eager to address for some time. We have a pretty good indication of Covenant military numbers right at the start of the war against humanity. This is likely to represent the lion's share of war material that it is capable of utilizing against foreign powers. The main sources I'm going to be drawing on in this segment are the two novels, Halo Oblivion and Halo Silent Storm by Troy Denning, the Halo Fleet Battles sourcebook, Halo Wars the video game, the comic Halo Collateral Damage, and the 2009, 2011, and 2022 encyclopedia. I have a running tally that I've kept track of over the years since I began to study Halo in depth. My chief interest was that I wanted to know what the average Covenant fleet fielded in battle would look like. The problem is that my notes are extremely messy, and originally didn't really cover things that fit within what Halo was to me, meaning things like Halo Reach, or 343 era works that directly retcon and contradict the things in Halo I value the most, I simply disregarded. Since then, I have, for the sake of this video, had to stomach things I would otherwise have ignored. The notes, such as they are so far gone, even I barely know what I'm talking about. I may go into more depth on the topic at a later date, but suffice it to say that in all my tracking, in most instances, the Covenant tends to field ships in the double-digit range, with the highest example within the range being the 54 ships that made up Halo Reach's interpretation of the initial Covenant invasion of the eponymous planet. Even though, despite what you may have been told by people either ignorant or dishonest, Halo Reach is utterly incompatible with the novel it retconned into Oblivion. That is a conversation for another time. What you are seeing here is just about every single fleet or naval force the Covenant has ever fielded against the UNSC that we have seen depicted. There's numerous examples of fleets of several hundred in existence, and one stationary force of over 1,000 vessels operating alongside one another. High Charity's defensive fleet. In my tracking of Covenant fleet movements, the main times in which anything north of 100 ships has ever been utilized has almost always been at times of utmost critical importance. To name a few examples: the Battle of Reach, according to Eric Nyland's Fall of Reach novel, stated to be just over 300 ships in its initial release, retconned to being 700 in re-releases, only to be reduced back to the original figure for the newer versions. The Covenant's showdown, including reinforcements, with Vice Admiral Preston Cole, who has been a thorn in the side of the Covenant war machine for almost 2 decades. The Covenant demonstratively went all out to remove him from the board, and paid dearly for it. The Grand Armada marshalled to destroy Earth, led by the 30-kilometer depot unyielding Hierophant. Stated by Cortana to be the largest fleet she had ever seen, something corroborated by the retconned MCC terminals, around 500 ships or more. The movement of High Charity, and what remains of its defense fleet in the Covenant Navy by the end of the war, when Delta Halo was discovered, stated again by Cortana to be the biggest fleet she had ever seen, after witnessing unyielding Hierophant. The early schism mustering of around 200 ships by the Imperial Admiral Zaitan. There's also this random tweet which apparently says the Battle of Earth faced the biggest Covenant fleet ever, which, considering unyielding Hierophant was supposed to be an instant loss for Earth if they ever arrived, seems a bit silly, but it's there. These were the moments when the Covenant went all out in a serious, perhaps you could even argue desperate, operation, and they tended to be in the last years of the war. Impressive though it may be that multi-hundred ship fleets could be fielded in the last months of the war, the 2009 encyclopedia made it clear that at this stage, the Covenant was practically out of ships. However, Halo Silent Storm and Halo Oblivion provided us with some interesting notions from the war's beginnings from the Covenant perspective. In the novel Halo Silent Storm, we are introduced to the Fleet Master of the Fleet of Inexorable Obedience, Nizat Kavarosi. In the early weeks and months of the war, he seems to be the primary architect of the crusade against humanity. His fleet in the novel is said to number at least 100 ships, with an additional 1 vessel destroyed at the beginning of the novel. We know from the Halo Fall of Reach novel and the Halo Collateral Damage comic book that other Force elements of various sizes exist at the same time, but we have no confirmation that they number anywhere close to this initial primary thrust. They may even be part of the same Force. The Silent Storm novel makes mention that humanity is currently being pushed back in 3 different sectors of space. As early as months into the war, there are 2 additional forces of indeterminate size, like the force we see in Halo Collateral Damage, but it's uncertain. In their desperation, the UNSC dispatched Battle Group X-Ray to undertake Operation Silent Storm, by which squads of Spartans in ODST will slip aboard Covenant ships and deploy fusion warheads in order to slow down the Covenant advance and give them pause, so that Battle Group India can harass their rear guard. Silent Storm would ultimately prove a success, destroying as many as 12 ships within Fleetmaster Kavarosi's fleet, a vitally important shipyard, and a 20-kilometer supercarrier undergoing construction at Zeust. The setback led to the Fleetmaster being forced to report to High Charity, and time was bought successfully for Battle Group India. Humanity was able to breathe a sigh of relief for around 6 weeks.
Historians note: on April 15th, 2526, more than a year after the loss of the planet Harvest to the Covenant during First Contact, humanity struck back with Operation Silent Storm. Invading enemy space for the first time, a combined force of Spartans and ODST space assault troopers attacked a supply world on the outer fringes of the hegemony, leveling 2 alien cities, eliminating an orbital shipyard, and decimating an enemy fleet. Now, just 6 weeks later, the Covenant is bringing its full might to bear. Human colonies are falling 2 and 3 a week, and new invasion routes are opening faster than the Office of Naval Intelligence can identify them. Like all of the Spartans, Blue Team is rushing from one disaster to another, desperately attempting to stem a brutal tide of violence that even the United Nations Space Command's top brass is beginning to believe cannot be stopped.
Upon being recalled to High Charity to answer for his failings, the Fleetmaster of the Fleet of Inexorable Obedience witnessed a sight he had never seen in all his near century of service in the Covenant Navy.
High Charity was both the Covenant's most sacred city and the seat of its imperial government. Though its existence remained forever secret to the unworthy, it was home to billions, beings from every world in the Covenant hegemony. It was the core of a holy manufacturing complex of boundless capacity, home port to the greatest navy in the galaxy, and a maze of soul-stirring wonder for every species privileged to wander its ways. Tethered to the stalk beneath the dome were thousands of capital ships, 100 the size of the Pious Rampage, and 20 even larger. In his 100 years of service to the Covenant Navy, Nizat had never seen such a gathering of vessels in one place, and he could tell by the tiny lights of the tender ships swarming around them that they were making ready to depart. And soon. Nizat continued to study the armada as the Pious Rampage approached its berth near the top of the stock, and he soon realized the vessels were clustered into 20 groups surrounding the 20 largest ships, each group a fleet twice the size of the one he had been given to eliminate the human scourge. The High Prophets were taking no chances this time. They were determined to expunge the human pestilence from the galaxy, and they would fail.
In harbour at High Charity, the Covenant had amassed a vast armada with which to utterly obliterate humanity. Nizat, a fleet commander with almost 100 years' service, had never seen such a vast host of ships. Divided into 20 fleets of 200 ships, with 100 CAS-class assault carriers and 20 larger vessels spread throughout, the Covenant is decidedly no longer playing around when it comes to the matter of humanity. This host, in combination with the High Charity Defence Fleet, amounts to some 5,200 vessels, and may not, but likely does, consider the loose ship elements that may be raiding or scouting or carrying out attacks on human colonies like we see in Halo Collateral Damage. It's also possible that the Arbiter from Halo Wars has a small force of his own acting out at this time. There's also the supposed deep space exploration vessels and Kig-Yar pirate merchant ships of low quality that may be patrolling the spaceways, and possibly some token reserve force of naval assets spread across the Covenant colonies, likely concentrated at fortress systems or other important installations. That being said, the Halo Oblivion narration says that the Covenant is, quote, bringing its full might to bear. This statement is explicitly made from the perspective of a historian analysing the war in the past tense. For a multitude of reasons, I would strongly argue that, in terms of tonnage, or in terms of teeth, this would be the Covenant's overwhelming majority of force that they can muster against a hostile entity, aside from the implications of this quote itself. This is a Covenant 27 years before the badly paved over cracks in its society, under the auspices of religious dogma, have reached their breaking point, the height of their power so far as we have ever witnessed in history. So when humanity bloodied their nose and cost the Covenant a dozen or more ships, a huge carrier, a vital shipyard, and 2 forerunner cities engulfed in nuclear fire, they weren't taking any chances this time. That change in stance is represented by 4,000 ships of various classes. The second reason why I think this would be the bulk of their offensive force is derived from the video game Halo Wars. Taking place 5 years after the mustering of this force, the central plot revolves around denying the Covenant access to an ancient shipyard that would swing the war in their favour.
Arbiter, you are unusually quiet. What troubles occupy your thoughts?
Hierarch, I do not wish to be impudent, but you have charged me with the destruction of humanity.
A most noble cause for one with such a troubled past.
And I am thankful for my task. But sire, you have me skulk in ancient ruins and search empty temples. How does this help me accomplish my goal?
The war with the humans will require a great deal many more machines than we can currently muster.
I will take what we have.
And leave us defenseless? No. The ancients will provide for us. This world shall be the birthplace for an invasion fleet beyond imagining. Enough to crush the humans quickly and with ease.
But this world lies dormant. It is just a shell.
Blasphemy! The key will be found with patience. But perhaps there is a quicker way. The human female from the Ice Relic. She has some knowledge in this regard. The new planet the relic has led us to has also led her. Capture that human and bring her here.
It will be done.
Please stop what you are doing. Understand fully the implications from this game's story. Despite having more ships, more troops, more territory,
And the Jedi on your side.
superior slip space technology, better weaponry, shields on both ships and soldiers, a higher population, biomechanical tech savants, and outright genetically superior or exotic populations to draw upon, and despite fully devoting itself to the task of exterminating the humans, who only exist on 800 planets within a 100 light-year diameter bubble of space, they outright failed to do so, miserably. My personal argument would be that while retcons have established the existence of many shipyards and other industrial resources across the Covenant Empire due to the nature of their society, mired in bureaucratic inefficiencies and high manufacture standards, that it must have taken them over a decade to substantially increase their ship production if they were capable of doing it at all. The very fact that regret had to outsource Covenant industry and seek out an ancient Forerunner shipyard, and the fact that Prima Guide states that the initial war went badly for the Covenant, suggests to me that the Covenant either lost the bulk of this force within 5 years, or they became so bogged down in constant hit-and-run warfare that the war continued at a snail's pace.
Most High Graces, as I approached High Charity today in the pious rampage, I could not help but notice the mighty armada you are preparing to send against the humans. It is a most impressive force, Regret said. The largest the galaxy has ever seen. Nizat chose to ignore Regret's sacrilege in claiming supremacy over the fleets of the Forerunners. Surely the Hierarch had misspoken, for no High Prophet would intentionally claim such a thing. It is certainly the largest fleet group I have ever seen, Nizat said carefully, and it will not be enough.
It was also Regret, one of the High Prophets, who stated that this force was the largest the galaxy had ever seen. Those fleets were apparently deployed in groups of 200, backed by flagships bigger than 5 kilometers in length, bigger than almost any fleet we have ever seen in the war, except in the most desperate of engagements. Where did the ships go? As it stands, after that initial muster of ships in 25-26, we only really began to see fleets field double-digit figures at a time, except for a few notable examples towards the end of the war, which were in all cases major battles of interest to the Covenant, the elimination of Cole, the planned invasion of Earth, and Reach, and the rush to secure a Halo ring. For my third point, make note of the fact the UNSC were once stated to both typically take on the Covenant at 4-to-1 odds if they were to have any hope of winning, and that the Halo Reach datapad states that the UNSC itself only ever built around 2,000 ships. If we have the Covenant in possession of many times more ships than the UNSC, without even going into how Reach introduced a class of ship that probably outmasses the entire UNSC Navy by itself, there comes a massive question of how the Covenant ever lost a battle. This problem will resurface when we talk about the absurd sizes Covenant ships can reach. The largest fleets we have ever seen for the UNSC itself never reached more than 200. The battle to retake Harvest was the largest mustering of ships in UNSC history at the time, and only numbered around 50 ships. As a quick tangent, I would actually state for the record that it is my personal belief that this number of ships for the UNSC should be re-evaluated, based on that reason. Either the UNSC was actively taking on Covenant ships, where the Covenant not only individually outmassed their entire force, but outnumbered them too, and the UNSC was still winning, or the UNSC must have had ships in the tens of thousands. Alternatively, I suppose the UNSC embraced the atom and went full Dr. Strangelove. My fourth point, I feel, is perhaps my strongest. This war was going so badly for the Covenant that they actually had to lie about their losses. It is now time to talk about the Covenant ministries. For the Halo Fleet Battles RPG rulebook. Ministry fleets. Strictly speaking, the Covenant lacks a standing military. Instead, it possesses a bewildering variety of martial organizations under the control or influence of one or more ministries, governing bodies who direct vital religious and secular activities. The power and prestige of their groups waxed and waned as they waged bloody internal wars for bureaucratic dominance and promotion of their particular brand of orthodoxy. But only 3 were of any significance to humans during the Covenant War. Furthermore, Ministry of Resolution. Originally a minor organization tasked with countering piracy and ensuring the safety of trade and conversion ships. Assignment to the Ministry of Resolution was considered an honourable posting that implicitly removed members from regular society due to long missions outside the explored rim of Covenant space. Under the direction of the High Prophets, the Ministry of Resolution grew rapidly in the early years of the Covenant War, as it provided cover to send fleets beyond the fringe and then hide combat losses to stall inconvenient questions by Sangheili military leaders. If the loss of hundreds or thousands of Covenant ships across 27 years of war were an inconsequential blip for the Covenant's true force, then why would there be any need to lie? Especially when the main perpetrators of this war are the prophets themselves, with a powerful mythos of religious zealotry to aid in their momentum. Now, having said this, I'm going to push the envelope on what is possible for the Covenant to possess just a little, and to do that, I'm going to cite the Halo Encyclopedia from 2022 and its quotes regarding the Covenant ministries and their assets. Despite the sheer immensity of its size and its seeming uniformity, the Covenant actually lacked a standing military. Instead, it possessed an extensive variety of martial organizations under the control or influence of one or more of the ministries. These semi-autonomous military bodies, each containing many thousands of warriors and dozens of warships, were often unfriendly rivals at best. But they followed the executory decisions of the High Prophets and the High Council with unquestioning obedience. Though the Covenant military seemed a force of overwhelming unanimity to their adversaries, within it were viciously fought competitions for honor. While their fleets had the capacity to bring ruin to entire star systems, this only disguised the internecine conflict under the surface. An underlying mutual disdain and distrust eventually became a significant strategic advantage for humanity during the war. Also, the vast majority of the Covenant's military organization was distributed into ministry fleets. We know that there are a great plethora of Covenant ministries, hundreds, I emphasize, by the war's end. Ministries carried out edicts handed down by the councils, but in practice, they were effectively independent. Ministries were assigned control over specific secular and religious activities, yet a broad amount of overlap in authorities and sphere of influence generated competition and infighting, which ironically helped the hierarchs maintain control. There were hundreds of ministries by the end of the Covenant, some of which only existed to keep ambitious members of the High Council busy. The issue here is that these martial bodies that operate under the command of Covenant ministries seem to have overlapping spheres of influence, per that previous quote. And we know of one ministry that is capable of drawing the resources of other ministries and worlds. It's also clear that some ministries have far more resources than others, and other ministries exist solely to disrupt the ambitions of the High Council. It's an extremely murky and nebulous region to navigate, but in the interest of covering all my bases, I'm going to look at making sure I at least give an estimate of numbers for potential Covenant reserves. We have the Halo Encyclopedia quote, which discusses the martial organizations that Covenant ministries oversee as possessing, quote, many thousands of warriors and dozens of warships. Assuming there was absolutely no overlap, which we know for a fact is not the case, and assuming both that every ministry had an equal amount of power, even though it's possible some ministries had effectively no power at all, and we go for higher end interpretations of a generous 500 or as high as 900 ministries, we could see an absolute maximum Covenant fleet complement, which factors in all elements. This would include tithe fleets, deep space exploration vessels, scout ships, support tenders, rear guard, loose end fleets as seen in Collateral Damage, High Chariot's defense fleet, and the war host that I'm calling the sanctimonious armada of we don't like humanity very much at all, actually. Subtracting High Chariot's defense fleet of 1,200 ships, the sanctimonious armada of we don't like humanity very much at all actually, and their 4,000 vessels, gives us around 6,700 to 16,300 ships. Now, I have already laid my arguments for why I don't think it's going to be anywhere near this number. I think I've done so pretty succinctly, but even allowing for these additional ships scattered around Covenant territory in deep space, I would not argue that these vessels are anything more than by and large the dregs of the fleet, the smallest, most outdated of the lot. The kind which, despite existing inside human space, no more than a few dozen light years from the Kig-Yar homeworld, take weeks or months to get there. Both the 2009 and 2011 Encyclopedia and the Shadow of Intent novella establish that the war against humanity and the schism that started in the last months of the war cost the Covenant their entire navy. High Charity's fleet even upon arriving at Delta Halo, was only comprised of some hundreds of vessels, and diminished even further against the Flood and the Battle of the Ark. If it's so bad that by the end of the war, they are siphoning resources from High Charity's defense fleet itself, I think that says quite a lot. Before the schism even started. These additional components, I'm not convinced, would be anything more than perhaps a smattering of destroyers and corvettes, and smaller ships. Logistics vessels, science ships, things of that nature. Perhaps a handful of CSO assault carriers at most. But even in the example of those ships, we know there was only 100 operating inside the Covenant's sanctimonious armada of we are not really the biggest fans of humans, if you were not aware, actually. The Covenant brought their full force to bear, and their full force included only 100 of some of their best vessels. The overwhelming visual examples of Covenant fleets show us CAS-class battlecruisers as a standard ship of the line, followed by the smaller destroyers, which are supposed to be relegated to deep space exploration and dishonorable crews, which I think says quite a lot about the state of the Covenant Navy if these are the ships they're having to pull out from remote stations. The lore also wants to have its cake and eat it too, by saying these ships are individually fleet killers. I'll leave you to make up your own mind on that one. I will go into more detail on ship distribution at the end of the topic, once I've delved into the Sith. My own personal feeling is that the Covenant Navy perhaps numbers some 7,000 to 9,000 vessels all told, but the most significant military presence of that force is concentrated between the High Charity Defense Fleet and the Sanctimonious Armada. As we move to the Sith side, we face a different set of challenges. This topic is a challenge for various reasons. The short answer is that the Sith Empire is only really featured mainly in a single game that came out 20 years ago, with a degree of lip service paid to it in its sequel, and a couple of sourcebooks or online supplementary material that emerged in the years following. By and large, the Star Wars universe left it and the era it succeeded behind a long time ago, for the sake of a pale imitation, which, while KOTOR is now legendary, and my favourite game ever, could also be lumped with the same pejorative. There does not exist, for example, an ICS-like sourcebook or encyclopedia that delves into the ships of the era in great detail. I want to talk about ships, but there's caveats I want to inject as well. A lot of the topic is going to be inferences based on industrial scaling and by virtue of size. There exists no set number as to the full numbers for the Sith Navy, and by the very nature of KOTOR's secondary antagonist, this number will always be in flux, as we will explore in the industrial output section in a future part. I'm hoping this segment isn't going to be bloated, but I feel like I'm obligated to go on a round course and talk about the Sith Navy origins, where it comes from. As Kreia notes, the men and women of this civilization may call themselves Sith and act the part, but they are more the reforged elements of a shattered Republic military that has had to endure half a decade of war, and a further 2.5 years of fighting or more on top of that.
Have we? You thought that the corrupted remnants of the Republic, the machines spawned by technology that Revan led into battle, were the Sith? You are wrong. The Sith is a belief, and its empire, the true Sith Empire, rules elsewhere.
It's because I'm a deserter. It's what I do. Served in both of them. Against the Mandalorians, before and after Revan, and again, when Revan declared war on the Jedi. I did, up until the Republic officers began to betray their oaths to the Republic and side with Revan, Admiral Kareth, Mon Halan, General Darryd, and all the rest. Right after that final battle at Malachor, I was right there with the rest of the defectors, because it was the right thing to do. No, it wasn't. We needed the Jedi during the Mandalorian Wars, more than anything. The Mandalorians were slaughtering us by the millions. The millions. You were at Serico, when they turned the Sterib cities into glass craters. At Duro, when Basilisk war droids rained like meteors onto the orbiting cities. And when the Mandalorians set fire to the Zoxan plains on Ares III, the fires that still burn. Without the Jedi who turned on the Council, without you, the Republic would have lost the war, and we would all be Mandalorian slaves or corpses. If that's what you want to call knowing when to fight and when to kill, then yes. But you can't really break down people into Sith and Jedi and expect everything to make sense. We were loyal to Revan. That was enough. He saved us.
After Malachor, after the Mandalorian Wars, that's when the Sith teachings started spreading through the ranks.
We knew where our loyalties lay. To the Jedi who came to help us, not the ones who sat back on Dantooine and Coruscant, watching us die.
So when those same Jedi who watched us die decided to start fighting us during the Jedi Civil War, we fought back. I fought back.
Let's talk about the Republic Navy. The Republic Navy has acted as the bulwark against the foes of galactic civilization for over 20,000 years. From the wars against the Tion and the Alsaken, to skirmishes against piracy, crusades against the Hutts, and defense against the Sith and Mandalorians, it has almost always come out on top. It is as old and storied as the Republic itself. Used for both defending galactic civilization and unmaking it, it has needed to be suitably armed and equipped to deal with threats across the galaxy, across the ages. In these wars, the Republic has been known to field vessels across millions of worlds simultaneously, such as during the Pious Era Crusades, simply as a tool of religious conversion. Against the ancient Sith, they faced Naga Sadow and his followers, who were capable of fielding thousands of vessels in just the Battle of Coruscant alone. Exar Kun's war against the Republic saw a quarter of the galaxy's infrastructure severely damaged, and a quarter of all planets see war, which would be at the very least tens of millions of worlds. The preceding years saw the Republic Navy become revitalized with the Coruscant Financial Exchange Establishment Act. In just a few decades, the Republic was able to recover from warfare engaged on millions of worlds, with their preferred method of naval buildup at this time being the outright purchasing of ships, instead of building their own. And the galactic economy really seeing an upswing and recovery a decade after the Exar Kun War, we know that the Navy had trillions of tons of warship, at the very least, flying around in space. I would actually argue this number would not be a fraction of what they are truly capable of, and in fact would need, by virtue of being a galactic civilization, but this number is enough for our purposes. It would not be the first time Wizards of the Coast undersold Star Wars with their numbers. Remember this number because we will bring it up at the end. While this number will go up and down as ships are lost and remade in the subsequent Mandalorian Wars, and any other conflicts that may occur at the time, we know that when the Sith would show up to begin the Jedi Civil War, that the Republic Navy had been largely rebuilt within a single year, unknowingly standing ready for the threat to come. The war against the Mandalorians saw fleets, likely in the hundreds or thousands, being given to relatively fresh Vice Admirals, who would be the lowest in the pecking order as far as seniority and prestige are concerned. The penultimate Battle of Malachor V saw, after half a decade of a deliberately manufactured brutal war, thousands of ships from either side crash onto the planet. This does not include the ships that are out of the system, defending other parts of the galaxy, destroyed in the battle beforehand, or by the activation of the mass shadow generator, as some of those ships orbit the dead grave of the planet. This is without taking into consideration that not only was there a Republic Navy left after the war, but a significant amount for Revan himself to steal, because the very point of this war, which would see thousands of vessels sacrificed in just one single battle towards the end of a war that had both sides on the brink of defeat, they still had this many ships to throw around and spend, while Revan, the Supreme Commander who single-handedly turned the war on its head, was deliberately culling from his number those who were unlikely to follow him into the next war.
There is a place in the galaxy where the dark side of the Force runs strong. It is something of the Sith, but it was fueled by war. It corrupts all that walks on its surface, drowns them in the power of the dark side. It corrupts all life, and it feeds on death. Revan knew the power of such places, and the power in making them. They can be used to break the will of others, of Jedi, promising them power and turning them to the dark side. Did you never wonder how Revan corrupted so many of the Jedi, so much of the Republic, so quickly? The Mandalorian Wars were a series of massacres that masked another war, a war of conversion, culminating in a final atrocity that no Jedi could walk away from, save one. And that is what I sought to understand. How one could turn away from such power, give up the Force, and still live. But I see what happened now. It is because you were afraid.
When a Jedi or any soldier suffers doubt, it weakens them. With the Jedi, however, it is more pronounced, since they are extreme examples. That is why Revan felt that Malachor V was so important. It was intended to be a conversion tool. Assessment. When faced with with a continuous series of hard-fought battles, I detected a significant statistical increase in Jedi following Revan over the Jedi Code, a compromise in principles brought about by battlefield conditions. The emotional weight of war changed Jedi morale, power, and eventually their allegiance. Conclusion: I believe the Mandalorian Wars were to beat the Mandalorians, and also to allow Revan to build the foundation of his army. But I am surprised you have not already arrived at this conclusion. Surely the loss of your troops and the Jedi who served under you at Malachor V had a detrimental effect upon you and your ties to the Force, and I suspect your desire to be around others ever again. Observation. Master, that was the lesson of Malachor. Any Jedi involved in the systematic slaughter on such a scale cannot help but doubt and question themselves. Observation. Master, I do not believe that the Mandalorians were the true target at Malachor. I believe that the intention was to destroy the Jedi, break their will, and make them loyal to Revan. I do not know if you examined the records of the deaths on Malachor, but you cannot escape that many of the Jedi and Republic soldiers who died were not Revan's strongest supporters. Observation. I believe that Revan was cleaning house at Malachor V. What ones did not die became Revan's allies against the Republic.
We were loyal to Revan. That was enough. He saved us. We knew where our loyalties lay. To the Jedi who came to help us, not the ones who sat back on Dantooine and Coruscant, watching us die.
So when those same Jedi who watched us die decided to start fighting us during the Jedi Civil War, we fought back. I fought back.
Some sources actually say he more or less stole what was left of the Republic Navy.
Revan and Malak were heroes, the great saviors of the Republic. A third of the Republic fleet was under their direct command. And then something happened.
The short period Revan vanished for necessitated a colossal and rapid rebuilding of lost assets. And even then we know for a fact that the Republic Navy was not the only navy loyal to the Republic at the time, with many systems having their own personal defensive fleets. The Republic Navy itself, not being the sum total of all military power across hundreds of millions of worlds, won't include things like sector defense fleets, or home system fleets belonging to member states and corporate interests. All of this is to say, if this is what the Republic is capable of, then the Sith, by virtue of the sheer threat they pose, will have far greater numbers. So how many ships do the Sith have? The biggest thing to understand about the Sith is that their armada came out of the literal vacuum of space with nothing but the hull and the guns on its back. It had no standing territory that we know of, aside from one, with the potential of other systems in the unknown regions that we never learn of. This means that all that sheer space you see on the galactic map, a third of settled space, including 5 distinct territorial holdings.
My homeworld was one of the first planets to fall to Malak's fleet. The Sith bombed it into submission, and there wasn't a damn thing our Republic forces could do to stop them.
Revan and Malak's forces had to physically go out and get that, and do so in less than 2.5 years, up until just before KOTOR 1 begins. All the while the Republic Navy is fighting and resisting them at every turn, stopping advancements, counter-invading, reconquering territory. The sheer logistics of doing so, not only conquering land but holding and fortifying it, defies any means by which I could satisfactorily quantify. Thousands of ships would not do it. Tens of thousands of ships would not do it either. Remember that this war was roughly 2.5 to maybe 3 years long, and while we know that Saul and other fleet commanders may have convinced many SAR systems to capitulate without a fight, which would then need a military presence garrisoned in order to truly be classed as Sith territory, many more will still need to be beaten and conquered. So, Revan's Sith, within some period of time, is stated in 2, I think 3, sources to have seized a third of the settled or known galaxy. This number could be less than our minimal assumption and would still carry with it some significant implications. There are 368 days in the Star Wars year. Revan's empire likely neared its peak in far less time than that, perhaps as little as months. If we assumed 1 million conquered worlds, 1% of our calculated size of the Republic, and that in order to do so, you would need the maximum amount of time the war could have possibly taken, which we will say is 3 years, then on any single day of the war, Revan's fleet would need to be fighting over 900 campaigns simultaneously. That's not 900 ships, that's 900 fleets of indeterminate number, equipped with support vessels and ground forces, and has not one single bearing on potential forces lost or left behind as a garrison. The battles would need to be won right then and there on the day. Mathematically, Revan would need to conquer over 900 worlds every day to possess less than 1% of galactic real estate, or he would need an even greater number of fleets than this, fighting tens of thousands of extended campaigns simultaneously. To put this in Halo terms, Revan is conquering the UNSC share of space every single day for the entire duration of the Jedi Civil War. In actual reality, that number would be more than 33 times this big or more. This assumes that every planet is conquered within a single day, and that it took 3 years, longer than the war actually took place over, to reach its full extent. Operating with our numbers, the number of independent elements of conquest that Revan would need on any day would be a minimum of 4,125. That's assuming one ship alone was conquering these planets. The KOTOR campaign guide gives us a sliver of information regarding fleet sizes. We don't know the true sizes a fleet can reach, but we know that a fleet subdivided into battle groups can amount between 5 to 10 capital ships, plus an indeterminate but greater amount of support craft. Based on that alone, the number would be closest to a minimum of 20,000 ships to 40,000 capital ships to capture just the central block, without considering the snowball nature of Revan's growth, not counting other conquests actively going on which aren't succeeding, or the never-ending waves of reinforcements we will cover later. If you're looking for an all-time minimum number to latch onto for something like the iconic Leviathan-class ship, I have my calculations for the Starforge's minimum initial complement based on the year of constant build-up in preparation for Revan's invasion. I will cover it in greater detail when I arrive to talking about industrial output, but the absolute minimum number I personally am going with is around 70,000 to 300,000 ships. In reality, far higher. These are not the ships produced by the sheer territory of millions of worlds with industry that Revan deliberately preserved. This is instead just what the Starforge itself provided at the start of the war for Revan's armada. And, despite this being a more than 3-hour long series, I promise we will address the Starforge eventually. We aren't factoring in what else it would be making simultaneously, or what it would be making every second of every day thereafter. My number for Leviathan counts come the end of the war would actually be well into the hundreds of thousands made all told, many of which would be destroyed over the course of the war. We know that the final battle of the war saw thousands of newly made Leviathans just sitting there, according to the Prima Guide, with there being so many ships they stretched beyond the edge of what we could see or count. These ships were held back, either in defense of the station, or in preparation for a new great push into Republic space, tens of thousands of light years away from the front lines, and quite literally on the other side of the galaxy relative to Malik's empire. Remember that Revan's armada would encompass the very many ships of all manner of classes that the Republic Navy itself possessed, and potentially even the Mandalorians as well. Ships going back as far as those from the old Sith Wars, or potentially even further back, as Star Wars is a setting that has been known to see ships persist millennia after first being created, with at least one 10,000-year-old designed ship being featured in the modern era of Star Wars. We're going to operate on the assumption that day one of the war against the Covenant, Malik's empire has to itself roughly equivalent numbers to the amount of Leviathans that it would invade Republic space with, so roughly 70,000 of the heavy hitter big ships. I think it is fair to assume, and in all likelihood will be much greater, as the Sith have done nothing but go from strength to strength over time during this war, with the Starforge, come the end, tripling its industrial output. There's absolutely grounds to argue for far more, and I've already alluded to that somewhat. I'll be exploring other ways you can infer higher numbers momentarily. As we go to the conclusionary phase of the segment, I want to remind you all of that quote that refers to trillions of tons of warships across the galaxy in the Republic Navy. We can work with this. We simply need to have a talk about size and scale, and Star Wars has something of an unfortunate relationship with that notion in my opinion. In short, I think a lot of numbers and values we are given for the lengths of ships by Wizards of the Coast are simply wrong. I'll insert my own thoughts on the topic as part of an epilogue to this video series. We are going to try as best as we can to work with the lengths given. When you're looking at ships from this era, and only take the game and its sequel for what it is, we are led to believe that the Hammerhead is at the very least the primary vessel utilized by the Republic Navy. Other sources have introduced much larger ships, like the 3-kilometer Inexpugnable class vessel, or the seemingly much larger Republic and Jedi vessels of Exar Kun's era. The Essential Guide to Warfare reads, "The largest ships yet seen in the galaxy were utilized by the Republic in this time. The problem is, We don't know what they are.
Some of the ships in the Sith fleet are those that were under Revan's command during the Mandalorian Wars, but many more are of an alien design we've never seen before.
We know of 3-kilometer Kumari battleships that existed before and after this era, primarily in the Republic Navy, and we know of the Centurion-class battlecruiser, an ancestor of the Star Destroyer. The range of these ships go from 1.2 kilometers to at least 3 kilometers. Larger ships could, and most certainly did exist at this time. We just don't know what they are or what they look like. There's also the Interdictor class itself, which we will go into my thoughts on its actual length eventually. It isn't even close to 600 meters long. To marry this previous quote on tonnage to an attempt at a naval number, let's look at the Hammerhead class cruiser. We are dealing with a 350 meter long vessel. A real ship of comparable length in real life would be the Gerald R. Ford class aircraft carrier. Fully loaded, this 333 meter long ship weighs some 100,000 tons. There are a plethora of issues with directly porting over this number to the Hammerhead. The first one is that they don't share the same dimensions, with the Hammerhead's iconic feature taking up a significant part of the ship's volume just by itself. There's also a long potential discussion about the material that comprises it, and whether Durasteel or whatever material it's made of is of the same density as regular steel, despite being stronger. With nothing being certain, as an assumption of a wildly lower or higher density comes with it other implications down the line, I'm going to give a scale of mass ranging from the equivalent of 3 aircraft carriers stacked on top of each other to a pretty high-end estimate of 1 million tons for every single Hammerhead. This gives us, if we divide at least 2 trillion tons of warship, anything from 6.6 million Hammerheads to 2 million Hammerheads. But this is not the full story, because we know the Navy is not entirely comprised of Hammerheads. There exist all manner of smaller ships in the Navy, and likely, a substantial amount of tonnage will be comprised of significantly smaller numbers for much larger ships. If we were to assume that the Hammerhead was even as low as 10% of the total mass of the Republic Navy, and that 90% is filled by all other potentials of ship, we would still be looking at anything from 666,000 to 200,000 Hammerheads. And that's without thinking about the rest of the Navy. Even if we drop to one singular percent, 1% of the entire Navy being Hammerheads, you'd still see 66,000 to 20,000 vessels only comprising this class. And here's another thing. If we do not make very reasonable assumptions that larger vessels within the Navy exist, then by necessity, the number of ships has to be exponentially higher. A great number of low tonnage ships means that there's a great many ships. A lot of high tonnage bigger ships means many ships in excess of a kilometer or more, but there will not be as many as if we assumed they were all Hammerheads. So the point to illustrate here is that we could have 90 to 99% of our minimal figure of 2 trillion tons, without even getting into greater interpretations of the figure, be dedicated towards filling out the rest of the Navy and still come away with huge numbers. We are easily looking at millions of ships scattered across all manner of ship types and classifications in the years succeeding the Great Sith War of 4000 BBY. That number will be affected and cut down by the Mandalorian Wars, by both Revan's own actions of self-sabotage and that of the enemy. But we know they were able to rebuild at least a portion of the Navy. They have to, because Revan's armada would eventually invade and need to be repelled by something. From the KOTOR RPG. We are talking about the Sith, and not the Republic. Note, that it is the Sith who are the ones with the supposedly limitless, infinite armada.
I don't, but Bastila is young, and she has a powerful command of the Force. We survived the crash landing, so I'm willing to bet that she may have too. Besides, what's the alternative? I mean, if she's dead, then no one can stop Malak and his Sith from wiping out the Republic, and I'd rather operate on the assumption that she survived. Right now, the Republic is the only thing keeping Malak's brutal fist from crushing the entire galaxy. And it won't be long until even the Republic falls to the Sith fleet.
The lure of the dark side is not easy to resist. Malak's power grows as more and more planets fall to his conquering armies.
If Malak is not stopped, the Republic will fall, and the Jedi will be hunted to extinction. The galaxy will enter a time of darkness and tyranny, not seen for 1,000 generations.
The source of this massive fleet is one of the many things about the Sith we cannot explain. It seems impossible to have created it in such a short time, yet we cannot deny its existence. That was nearly a year ago. But things have not improved. Malak has stepped in and assumed the mantle of Dark Lord for himself, though he's far from Revan's equal in strategy or tactics. Still, his fleet continues to grow in both ships and soldiers. If we do not find some way to stop the Sith soon, Malak will overwhelm us with sheer numbers.
With comparative or greater numbers, it is exceptionally difficult for me to argue with a straight face that the Sith are going to be operating with any less than millions of ships of all manner of shapes and sizes, with at least 70,000 of them alone being the premier Leviathan class. So, to end the video out, here are the two numbers by point of comparison. For the Sith, 70,000 plus mainline Leviathan vessels, plus practically millions of ships of indeterminate length and mass. Larger ships, smaller ships, it does not really matter. On every single day of the Jedi Civil War, in order to adequately conquer territory equivalent to 1/3 of the settled galaxy by the end of the war, the Sith Empire would be utilizing as many ships as the Covenant has planets. And that's assuming that the ships see no losses or necessitate reinforcements. That all day, every day, it's the same few thousand elements constantly invading, conquering, and moving on to the next world within 24 hours, which is just not the case. The Covenant fleet is up against a foe that has a far wider spread of equivalent sheer tonnage by comparison. To understand that fully, let's do a bit of digging into what the Covenant fleet would actually be comprised of. To call back to our quote relating to Halo Oblivion and the Armada of, "It is perhaps an understatement to say we lack a fondness for Homo sapiens," we know that 100 vessels of this fleet will be of the 5-kilometer long CSO class assault carrier. I will reiterate that I don't think there are many beyond this number in existence across the Covenant. Each one of these ships masses some 2.2 billion tons per vessel. In these ships alone, we would have a total tonnage of about 220 billion tons. That's nothing to scoff at, but these ships are on the upper end of vessels at play. We know of 20 ships among the 20 fleets that are larger still, the flagships. The unfortunate part is, we have no idea how large and what class. They could each be equivalent to the 28-kilometer long supercarrier seen in Halo Reach, the Long Night of Solace. But that ship alone has raised some severe questions about the war and the UNSC's chances long term. That ship alone masses 152 billion tons. This single vessel likely outmasses the entire UNSC Navy 100 times over, because this one single ship is equivalent in mass to over 110,000 Paris-class heavy frigates. If they had this vessel, and indeed multiple such vessels, how did the Covenant ever lose a single battle? We know that other ships of that length exist, and we know that the 2011 Encyclopedia introduces a ship even larger still, measuring 32,000 meters. We have smaller vessels in existence like the 20,000 meter unfinished Hammer of Justice as well, so it is not a stretch to say that these 20 ships could exist from all different shapes and sizes beyond 5 kilometers. It is an extraordinarily large gap, and nothing actually says how big it is, so there is actually no evidence that it is of size comparable to the Long Night of Solace. The Long Night of Solace required a desperate gamble to even take out, and the sacrifice of a Spartan too, who shouldn't exist. We are going to bloat our Covenant Navy right here, straight for the top interpretations, and argue that they will have 20 of these vessels, which makes for a representation of 3 trillion tons of warship. That's 120 ships of the Covenant's 16,000 ships accounted for. Let's say that there's even another 100 CCS class ships for the entire Covenant, just to be safe. If we assume that half of the remaining initial number of ships in the anti-human armada are the ubiquitous Ket pattern battlecruisers, that's another 360 billion tons, the total mass of 3.4 trillion tons. That still leaves us some 12,000 ships to account for the mass of, and that goes into extreme speculation territory that I'm more or less going to draw the line here. Perhaps at most round up to 4 trillion and call it a day. I am already severely inflating the tonnage of the Covenant fleet as is, with a full 3/4 of the Navy tonnage being dedicated towards just 20 ships, and assuming they are the same as a mega ship we have only ever seen employed in combat one single time, at the end of the war, and never again. But we know they had more than one of this class, and we know of 2 further vessels of similar length, Unyielding Hierophant and the Imperial Admiral's capital ship, though the Uneven Elephant is stated to be rather hollow internally, so its mass may be significantly lower. By comparison of the tonnage, we have 4 trillion tons of Covenant ship versus an ambiguous trillions of tons of Republic ships. It requires the highest interpretation of Covenant vessels and the lowest interpretation of 2 trillion for the Republic, in order for the Covenant to have the higher mass here. But even if they did outmass the Republic, who are losing long term to the Sith, the smaller mass per ship means that there's a lot more of them. As soon as we start interpreting that tonnage number as higher, the Covenant, with its bloated total mass being taken up by 20 specific ships, gets left in the dust. Over 700 years before the KOTOR era, the Galactic Republic was mustering enough cathedral ships to blot out the skies on millions of worlds simultaneously. You would need billions of capital ships to pull this off. However you slice it, in terms of comparison to numbers, the Sith Empire drowns the Covenant in fleets of Durasteel. Next time, we talk about the faster than light speeds of both factions, and how fast they could expect reinforcements to arrive. Thank you for watching.
What's this? He tapped a dot on the map, squinted, and read the tiny words. This uneven elephant. Unyielding hierophant, the chief corrected. Don't look like any uneven elephant to me. More like 2 squid kissing.